Good morning. This is something that I've been planning on talking about for a while. I've talked to other people about it in various formats, but this is something that I think it's something we need to consider, given that if you've been following the last couple of videos, I believe that we are dealing with some hard times coming up in the fall and shortly beyond. So it works like this. What's going to happen when things become difficult? I described in the previous video. By the way, for those of you that are first joining, my name is Professor Ronin. I'm a former college adjunct in the criminal justice program at a state university, and for 18 years prior to that I was a police officer, and for 10 years prior to that I was a high school teacher. So that's where that comes from. Professor Ronin, a Ronin is an unemployed samurai without a master. Sometimes they resort to being a mercenary, and other times they wander around doing samurai stuff. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. So what I want to talk about today, and by the way, welcome back to those who are regular followers. Most of you are my former students, and I'm glad that we're keeping in touch that way. Today I want to talk about the Hitler's Barber story. Now, what in the world is the Hitler's Barber story? I first learned about this in a book written by James Wesley Rawls called Survivors. He's got a whole series of dystopian fiction, prepper fiction. A lot of us of a certain age cut our teeth and started thinking in terms of preparing for a rainy day by reading his books. And in Survivors, there's a section where some people are off in the mountains outside of Vancouver talking about, this is after the big collapse, where what's going to happen with the Canadian Royal Mounted Police? Where are they going to fit in? And this discussion then takes place where they talk about the Hitler's Barber story. Well, Hitler's Barber refers to a Woody Allen shtick. Woody Allen was a comedian, and at one time he was actually kind of funny. But he tells the story of, at the end of World War II, they find Hitler's personal barber, and they asked him, here you were able to be with the Fuhrer with a straight razor in your hand every day. Why did you not do something? And I'll get to that in a second. It comes in a second. So that's the deal. His story is funny, sad, as a lot of good comedy tends to be. Anyway, what do we think that our soldiers in law enforcement, primarily law enforcement, I wasn't in the military, but I was in law enforcement enough where I've got an informed opinion. What do we think their response is going to be in the face of what is already an increasing amount of illegal orders? And by illegal, I mean things that specifically violate their constitutional oath, and in some cases violate the federal law, which forbids them from infringing on constitutional rights under color of law. So behind the badge, behind an official office that you have, that law, it's a federal law, actually goes up to and includes the death penalty if in the process of violating someone's constitutional rights you cause them to be killed. You can actually suffer the death penalty for it. Now, truth in advertising, in my research I've never seen a case where someone has been successfully prosecuted under that or that federal statute. But it exists. Soldiers are required to not obey illegal orders. When they don't follow that law, we get things like the My Lai massacre. We get Abu Ghraib prison. Police are required to not obey illegal orders. And when that obedience is not followed, we get confiscation of firearms, bulldozers, heavy equipment in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina by law enforcement. And along with other things. You want to read an interesting story, read about the Battle of Athens in 1946, where veterans rose up in armed revolt against a corrupt sheriff in Athens, Tennessee. There's a movie about it. If you're not a reader, check out the movie. It's fairly accurate. But anyway, what are the options? What's going to happen to our soldiers and police when they are given these orders? What are the options that we can look at and expect them to take? Some of these are my thoughts. Some of it is James Wesley Rawls' interpretation of this. But this is what I think those options will be for our police officers and for our soldiers. Primarily police officers. This is where I'm going to stay and keep most of my focus, because that's where my area of knowing what I'm talking about tends to be a little stronger. There are basically 6 options that I've come up with. One of them is some officers, when told, you will confiscate firearms, go door to door. You will go door to door and load people up and take them to a vaccination center and force them to get a vaccine. You will enforce laws keeping people from worshiping in church in large groups, but you can still go to the strip club. So, some of them will say, no, that's unconstitutional. If you try to force me to do it, here's my badge, here's my gun belt, I'm out the door. So they'll just resign. And I understand that decision comes with consequences. So let's get to those in a minute. The second group are the ones who will carry out those orders. And they consist of 2 types of people. The one I refer to as honest mercenaries. When you abandon your oath of office, for military, it's to, defend against, protect the Constitution, defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. For police, it's to support the Constitution of the state of Wisconsin and the United States. Every state is a little different. Once they quit doing that, and they follow illegal orders in order to continue receiving a paycheck, they are by definition mercenaries. Government-paid mercenaries. And we have some of them out there, a disappointing number. There are still many, many good, honest cops out there, but they don't tend to get a lot of the press, right? So I call them the honest mercenaries, the ones who say, yeah, I'm in it for the money. I've actually heard officers say, when people complain about a particular law, like underage drinking, something like that, well, this isn't a right law, and you go, well, the cops would go, well, change the law and then I'll enforce that. That is a scary statement. And I didn't know why at the time, but I felt a chill when I first heard that phrase, and I've heard it more than once. So you have the honest mercenaries. You'll also have the true believers. Those are the ones who believe in the woke narrative and believe that basically anybody in possession of a gun not wearing a police or military uniform is a target and an enemy, and they are at war with those people. So we have the war on drugs, we have the war on gangs. What do you do with a war? You fight and you break things and hurt people, right? The first 2 wars were not successful. The war on patriotism, which has now been labeled domestic terrorism, I expect there to be similar outcomes, but it's going to be messy. Basically, the woke crowd will look at their oath and treat it like an Apple user agreement, where you just, skim down what's written and you click on I agree, and then you never think about it again. There's a third group. The other group, I think, will make up the majority of police officers at first. They won't like what's going on, and they are getting ready to resign, but the time isn't quite right. I've got to keep that paycheck coming in. I'm retiring in a few years. I got to keep my insurance. My wife won't be happy. Things like that. I understand. I have to live with a wife who I love dearly, and she loves me, but I understand the importance of happy life, happy wife. But they say they're going to resign at some point because they know what they're doing is wrong, but they know in their heart of hearts that they will not. The time just never comes. And I refer to them as the dishonest mercenaries, and this is also the Hitler's Barber crowd. Going back to the Woody Allen stick, when Hitler's barber was asked why he didn't do something about the Fuhrer when he was standing next to him with a straight razor in his hand every day, he said, well, I was going to, but I was just waiting for the right time. And I actually had a plan. My plan was when I would cut his hair, I was going to loosen the cloth around his collar and let a few hairs spill down his back so that he would suffer irritation. But at the last moment, I lost my nerve. All right, so that's the punchline. That's the shtick. But that's what you'll have with this third group who doesn't like what's happening, but hey, I've got to maintain my lifestyle. I've got bills to pay, and I will do what I'm told in order to keep that stuff happening. Dishonest mercenaries, Hitler's barbers. I think the fourth will be a small group at first and will grow gradually. They will time their departure when they can take as much equipment with them as they can and join the resistance. Of course, that means becoming a criminal in the eyes of the law, correct? You know, take stuff that isn't yours. You don't have to be a lawyer to know that that's illegal. However, as we approach the kinetic phase of the Second Civil War, which I believe has been in progress since the 1960s, you will begin to see that. And they'll commit acts of sabotage as they go out the door to join the resistance. There will be a small group at first, very, very small, who I believe there's a certain type of officer who will turn their guns on their teammates, and they'll die fighting with them. That won't happen until very late in the process, when the atrocities begin and they reach a point where they can't stand by and look anymore, and they take action. Just touch on that very, very briefly, because I think that will be rare and low-key in terms of the beginning, but as things ramp up, it's a possibility that will begin to happen based on things that have happened in other parts of the world, in other parts of the country during the last 100 years or so. The sixth group, and I think this will probably combine with the Hitler's barber crowd. A friend of mine with connections to the Guard refers to it as soldiering. Soldiering, where they slow down the process of getting things done by overcoming with minutia. And what that would mean is, an example would be, you shut down an entire base because a given piece of equipment is missing. You can't find a distributor cap for one of your Humvees, or something gets shut down. Everybody participates in the search. Something more serious, components for a rifle. So everything gets shut down because things got lost, either in reality or on paper. So the process is slowed. In the police world, my experience with my department is that these officers are highly trained and very professional people. But even so, given the stress of the job and the workload, occasionally reports are misplaced. Statement papers are misplaced. Evidence is improperly labeled. It happens when you have, several hundred cases a year in a small-time police department. That's still a lot of pieces of evidence and tons of paperwork. And even though we have a lieutenant whose job it is to make sure that paperwork is all squared away, things happen. Squad cars. It was a good day when I would do my squad check at the beginning of my night shift, and the oxygen tank in our first responder kit was topped off and ready to go. Or the rifle in the trunk was properly prepped and clean and ready to go. So there was always stuff. I bought a lot of headlight bulbs, because it's always embarrassing to stop somebody for a headlight out and you look back at your squad and you've got a headlight out too. That's just stuff that needs to be done. And deliberate acts to slow the process would be hidden, at least at first, among the routine snafu of day-to-day operations. So I think you'll see more of that from the people who are not quite ready to resign, but they are willing to stay in and gum up the works when a given agency starts doing things. Now, be very clear that I am not advocating for any of these acts involving violence or destruction on the part of my former coworkers. I was a professional and proud of it my coworkers were professionals. They still are, and proud of it. God knows it takes a certain kind of person to do the job in this day and age. All I'm doing is summarizing what I think may be on the horizon, because I've told you before, there's a storm coming. And how are people going to react to that when it finally happens? So that's it. 15 minutes. I went a little long. I try and keep these short, around 10 minutes or so. But understand that times are changing. If you'd have told people back in late 2019, early 2020, what the situation on the ground in the country, in the world would be like now, well, people who said those things were conspiracy theorists, right? People who were talking about the virus being released from the Wuhan lab, their statements got taken off of social media for misinformation until they discovered that they couldn't hide it anymore. And now those statements do get onto social media because it turns out that it was true. So understand that normalcy bias is a killer. It's an offshoot of denial, and be able to see the things that are in front of you and be able to see the things that are up the road. And that's what I recommend. Again, I don't mean to put a downer on you, but I think knowledge is power. And if this has helped you in any way, like and follow my channel. And I will see you next time. Take care, stay safe, stay vigilant.